Are you present and living in the moment, or is your mind constantly wandering off into the distance? As humans, we've lost our ability to live in the moment. We're constantly worrying about things outside of our control, things in our past, and things that we want. This leads us to never actually living in the moment. Life passes us by and we never have a moment to appreciate what we have. Being present is not something that comes naturally to me. It's something I had to work very, very hard at, but it's one of the most rewarding things that I've learned. By the end of this video, you should understand how to live presently and in the moment. In this video, we're going to cover channeling our attention, removing cheap dopamine, and not multitasking. So first of all, how can we channel our attention to become more present? Well, here are 3 ways that we can do that. Firstly, we actually need to protect our attention. A lot of us have started to realize this, but our attention is actually our most valuable resource. See, attention is an incredibly finite resource, just like our time, but with our attention, we don't seem to be able to protect it all that well. If you just bought a really nice car, you're really happy with this purchase. When you go to the shops, when you leave your car, what do? You lock it. Why do you lock your car? You lock your car because you're protecting that resource. Same thing with your house. When you leave your house to go off to do whatever you're going to do, you probably lock your house because you're protecting that resource and the resources inside of that house. So why is it that we lock our car, that we lock our house, but we don't protect our most valuable resource, which is our attention? See, a lot of us just allow anyone and anything to take our attention whenever we want. Whenever we hear a little ding that goes off on our phone, we stop whatever we're doing and we put all of our attention on that ding. We allocate our attention to things happening on the other side of the world, things completely outside of our control, events that happened in our past and things that we cannot change. And the very, very first thing that you need to do after you realize that attention is your most valuable resource is you have to start protecting it. Start guarding your protection like you would guard your house, like you would guard your car. Because if you start to protect your attention and if you only allocate your attention to the things that matter, you're going to become so much more present. See, if you aren't thinking about 50 different things at once, if you don't have 50 things that are pulling your attention in all these different directions, do you think you're going to be more focused on a specific task or less? If I was talking to you and at the same time that I was talking to you, you were also thinking about a political race happening on the other side of the world. And you're also worrying about that war happening over on the other side of the world. And you are also worried about that school shooting that just happened. And you were also worried about what that person's doing on social media. And you're also worried about that buzzing thing happening in your pocket. All of these things that you're worried about that are pulling your attention. If we can understand that we need to protect our attention at all costs, it's going to allow us to be so much more present and so much more in the moment. Now, the next thing that we can do, and possibly the best thing that we can do to channel our attention more effectively, is to stop worrying about things outside of our control. So many of us are just super concerned with all of this noise, all of this nonsense that's outside of our control. If you're constantly thinking about all of these things that are happening on the other side of the world, things that are happening in other people's lives, things that have already happened that are in the past, then you're always going to have your attention split. You're always going to be thinking about different things and you can never truly be present. I remember during the 2020 US election, I was in my first year at university. I'm from Australia, so I was at university in Australia, and I remember for maybe 3 months leading up to that election, I was incredibly involved in that election. Now, not in any meaningful way that I was changing the outcome, but I was involved in that I was worried about it. I was always thinking, how is this going to impact the polls? How is this going to impact the voting demographics in Nevada? Or how is this going to affect Texas? How is it going to affect this swing state, that swing state? All of these things I was concerned about, and every day I would be constantly consuming news, consuming information about this election. I was spending lots and lots of my attention, lots of my time worried about this thing that was on the other side of the world and completely out of my control. And what happened was, I worried about these things, I concerned about them, and then November 7 came around, and then the election happened. And then everything I was worried about, all of those things that I was trying to figure out, how is this going to impact this, how is this going to impact that, none of it mattered. Literally none of it made a difference whatsoever. The election happened, Biden became president, and that was that. All of that time that I wasted, all of that attention that I wasted thinking about how is it going to affect this? How is it going to affect that? I was allocating so much of my attention to something completely out of my control, and it was consuming the way I was thinking. My day-to-day activities, there was always that little thing in the back of my head thinking, what is going to happen in this election? I was completely consumed by it. And it just seems so silly now looking back on it. And I know that I'm not the only person who does it. Everyone right now seems to be so concerned in politics, overly concerned about it. But realistically, it's just another one of those things that you have very little impact over, effectively none. And realistically, if you want to have impact over politics, you probably have to spend a certain amount of time not worrying about it to become a person who's able to actually influence it. For example, love Elon Musk or hate Elon Musk, but Elon Musk probably wasn't spending the first 30 years of his life concerning himself in politics. He was concerning himself in trying to build billion-dollar companies. And after he built billion-dollar companies, he realized, well, I can actually influence politics now. So then he concerned himself with it. He didn't start by thinking, oh, how is this going to affect this poll? And what is this going to do to this swing state? None of it matters. At the end of the day, only focus on things in your control. And using Elon Musk as an example, he only started to concern himself in politics when it was something that was within his control. So definitely shifting as much of my attention as possible to only the things within my control has been one of the biggest returns on investment that I've done. Now, the third way that we can really channel our attention, and this one might be a little controversial for some people, but it certainly served me, and that is stop thinking about people that you're never going to see again. Now, whether that's people that you've never met and you probably never will meet, or whether that's people that you met, they were in your past and you're no longer ever going to see them again, let's stop worrying about people you're never going to see again. Because whether it's you spending huge amounts of time on social media, living vicariously through other people's amazing lives, or whether it's constantly being in fear about trying to start something new because you're concerned about what people in school thought of you. Either way, it's not helpful to constantly be thinking, what are other people doing or how are other people thinking about me? It's just pulling your attention in different ways, and it's not helpful at all because it adds fear to your life. It makes you overly concerned with other people and people that aren't going to be in your life at all. It makes no sense. I remember when I first started producing content, which was at the very start of this year, and I produced the piece of content, I had it all edited, all ready to go, and I was like, great, cool, let's upload it. And I just remember being stuck, being paralyzed in fear about posting this thing because I was so concerned with what people that I used to go to school with thought about me. Now, these are some of these people I hadn't seen for over half a decade, but I was really concerned with what they were going to say, what they were going to think about me. And this really affected me. I was, I struggled to get that first piece of content out. I was a little bit nervous, a little bit concerned. But then I posted it, and cool, I got some, mean comments, people weren't nice, whatever, as you would expect. But guess what happened? Nothing. Nothing about my life changed. I still never saw those people again. The people I saw in my life were still the same people. They still liked me. Nothing really changed. But that battle was all going on in my head. It was my attention gravitating towards people that I'm never ever going to see again. And it just seems so silly and so ridiculous. But so many of us are allocating attention to thinking about what other people are going to think about us rather than what we actually want to do. And at the end of the day, why would you let the opinions of a few other people that you're never going to see again impact the actions you take to move you towards the life of your dreams? Now, the second thing we can do is we can remove cheap dopamine. Now, there are 3 ways that removing cheap dopamine is going to help you live a more present life. But first of all, I need to explain, what do I mean by removing cheap dopamine? When I say removing cheap dopamine, I'm really just talking about eliminating those spikes in dopamine, those hits of dopamine you get that aren't moving you towards your goals, where you're constantly consuming these entertainment, things like scrolling TikTok, things like playing video games, things like watching TV shows, things like watching movies, all of these distractions that are really just there to give you a little boost in dopamine and make you feel good, but in no real way are moving you towards your goals. If we can actually remove those big spikes, those big peaks, what's going to happen is our brain's going to realize, actually, you're not producing that much dopamine. It's going to bring your baseline level of dopamine up, and as a consequence, everything is going to be more enjoyable. Everything is going to feel better. So the first way that removing cheap dopamine from your life is going to make you more present is that you're actually going to enjoy the moment more. Think about the times where you were incredibly present. You felt like you were really living in the moment right now. Those times were probably times when you felt really good, when you felt really incredible. Well, how are we actually going to start to feel that sensation more? Well, we're probably going to start to feel it more if we're producing more dopamine, if our dopamine levels are higher. So if your baseline dopamine level is higher, you're receiving more dopamine from doing everything, then there's a lot higher chance that you're actually going to be able to live in the moment. If you feel absolutely terrible because you have constant spikes of dopamine and as a consequence, your brain has to bring your dopamine levels down for everything, that makes everything a little bit more boring, a little bit more dull. And if everything is boring and dull, you're probably not going to enjoy it, and therefore you're not going to be in the moment as much. And the second way that removing dopamine is going to make you more present, more in the moment, is you're going to stop searching for those hits. After you've removed those cheap dopamines, those quick hits, over a period of time, it's no longer going to become a part of who you are. You're no longer going to be constantly craving those little hits. And what happens when you actually stop craving those hits, those little spikes of dopamine you get, those cheap little hits you get from doing nothing, is you're actually going to be more present. Because let's say right now I'm doing work. I need to get some work done. If in the back of your head, your brain is constantly thinking, I want you to be watching TikTok. I want you to be playing video games. I want you to be binge watching a TV series, then it's going to be a lot harder for you to stay present and in the moment because your brain is constantly drawing you outwards. How can I get those cheap hits of dopamine? How can I get more dopamine for less effort? And when you remove those spikes of dopamine over a period where you actually recalibrate your brain to no longer seek those hits, which may take 30 days or so, your brain is no longer going to start craving those hits. And when your brain is no longer craving things, your attention is more channeled, more focused on what you're doing. You're going to be more present and you're going to be more in the moment. And the third thing is you're going to have more energy. Think about times when you were incredibly present, you were incredibly in the moment. You probably had quite a lot of energy. Now, people who take drugs, for example, like if you took something like cocaine, you're probably going to feel incredibly present, incredibly in the moment. I've heard a lot of people say that they have really great conversations when they're on cocaine, right? And why is that? Well, that is because the cocaine is significantly spiking their dopamine levels. They have very, very high levels of dopamine, and things like having a conversation become incredibly stimulating, incredibly engaging. And because they're incredibly stimulating and incredibly engaging, you feel very present. You feel very in the moment. So the same thing will happen. Obviously, it's not going to feel like you're taking cocaine all the time, but when you have higher dopamine levels, you're really going to start to feel more engaged, feel more present and in the moment because you have more energy. You feel that spike of energy from the dopamine you have, and you're going to actually feel like you're more in the moment. Now, I remember it might have been about 2 weeks after I really said, look, I'm not going to touch any cheap dopamine. I'm not getting any form of dopamine from anything that is not moving me towards my goals. And after about 2 weeks of doing that, I remember I have a walking trail, which is near my house, and often on a little break, I would go for a walk. And I remember noticing how beautiful the trees were. And I thought, I've been living in my house, in this house, for over a year. And only now have I noticed how beautiful the trees were. And it really made me realize that because I was so highly stimulated, because I had all of these quick hits, I never really got to enjoy the little beauties in life, the little moments of pleasure that you get, the subtle pleasure that you get in life. Things like how beautiful the trees were, things like the nice weather, things that you often take for granted, you start to actually appreciate because you're no longer just constantly looking for that quick hit. And of course, your dopamine is a little bit higher, so you're going, that actually is quite nice. That actually is quite beautiful. But it was very interesting that it took me a year to realize how beautiful my surroundings were. And it was really came from the fact that I was no longer getting these quick hits, these spikes constantly all the time that were, basically downgrading my brain. And the third thing that we can do to become more present is to stop multitasking. This has been an absolute game changer in my life. I used to think that in order to get more stuff done, you have to always be multitasking all the time. The reality is that you do not need to be multitasking all the time. And a lot of the time, all it does is keep you distracted and stop you from actually being present, being focused, and being in the moment. Now, firstly, stopping multitasking is going to make you significantly less distracted. For example, if I'm talking with a friend, I am never, ever, ever going to be on my phone. I'm either talking to my friend or I'm on my phone, but I'm not doing both. If I ever am in a conversation and I'm mid-conversation and someone just pulls out their phone and starts texting, or someone gets a notification, they check it, I'll just get up and leave. Like, I don't have any time for that. And pretty much every single time, that buzz that's going off on your phone is not going to be worth you stopping a conversation that you're currently having to do that, because it can nearly always wait. But a lot of the time we're, talking to people and we're on our phone, or we're trying to do two tasks at the same time while we're working. We're trying to do all these things that are multitasking. Now, of course, if you're doing some sort of menial task, like you're washing dishes and you're listening to a podcast, sure, I understand that. That's fine. But if it's something that requires your attention, for example, if you're talking to another person or you're trying to get work done, multitasking doesn't really have a place, because it pulls your attention in two different directions. And when your attention is pulled in two different directions, as we know, you're going to be less focused and you're going to be less present and in the moment. Now, the second thing, when you actually stop multitasking, when you just focus on one task at a time, you forget everything else that's going on for a certain period of time. For example, if I want to go for a walk with a friend, I'm only doing that. That is the only thing I'm doing. That's the only thing I'm thinking about. When I talk about multitasking, we should also be thinking about multitasking in our head. I'm thinking about only what I'm doing right now. I'm only going for a walk right now. I'm not thinking about what's going on in an hour's time. I'm not thinking about what happened last week. I'm just thinking on what's happening right now. If you're working on a specific task, you're not thinking about what other tasks you have to do, what you have to do after this. You're just thinking about, what do I have to do right now? And if you're only focusing on what you have to do right now, of course you're going to be much more present. And as a result, you're going to get a lot more done. And finally, you're able to give something your full attention. And I think that's really, really important. We've discussed the value that your attention has. If you decide that this is what I should be doing, then you should allocate all of your attention to it. If you've decided, out of all the things that I could be doing in my day right now, I'm deciding to do this, then you should be giving that 100% of your attention. Whether that is doing work, whether that is exercising, or whether that is just socializing with your friends, give it all of your attention. Because if it's your work, I'm sure your work would appreciate all of your attention. I'm sure if you're exercising, your exercise would appreciate all of your attention. And I'm sure your friends would also appreciate it if you gave them your full attention. Because at the end of the day, we can't directly influence what happened in the past, and we can only change what happens in the future by the actions we take right now. So why would we think about anything outside of what's happening right now, right in that moment? And if we decide that we're going to do this right now, then we may as well allocate 100% of our attention, 100% of our focus to that. The number one, the absolute biggest thing that I did to improve my productivity, bar none, was waking up in the morning and saying to myself, you have two options. You can either do nothing, or you can do the most important task in the day. And that effectively made me make the decision of, I have to allocate 100% of my attention to this. I cannot multitask. I cannot do anything else. I can only do this one thing, or I could do nothing. But I can't do anything in between. And what would happen is, if you were feeling really unmotivated, is you would sit there and you would look at the wall for 2 minutes and go, this is more boring than me just doing the work. And that was one of the biggest productivity things that improved for me. But it's also one of the best ways that I found to be more present, more in the moment, is that if I removed all other possibilities and said the only thing I can do is this right now, then I became much more present, whether it was with my friends, whether it was with the work I was doing, with the exercise I was doing, whatever it was. When I only gave myself two options, either do this one thing or do nothing, I got so much more done. So if you guys want to learn how to become more present, if you're serious about rewiring your brain to love to work hard, you can book a free call. I'll leave a link in the description below. Otherwise, if you got some value out of this video, please like, please subscribe. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.